If you hold HBAR, XRP, XDC, or XLM, the US banking system just changed underneath you. 3 federal agencies, 1 piece of federal law, a hard deadline closing in, and most crypto holders have no idea any of it happened. Over the last 14 months, the agencies that control what American banks can and can't do have quietly coordinated the biggest regulatory reset in the history of financial assets. The door that kept banks from touching these networks at scale got taken off the hinges, and the deadline that forces the final rules into place is now weeks away. If you hold any of these 4 tokens, you need to understand what just happened, what it means for your position, and what you should be watching between now and July. But before we go further, I'm not a financial advisor, and this video is for educational purposes only. Crypto is extremely risky, so make sure you do your own research and never invest more than you're willing to lose. Now, let me hit you with the headline first, and then I'll explain why it matters. In 2025, the agency that grants federal bank licenses handed them out to 5 crypto companies on the same day: Circle, Ripple, BitGo, Fidelity Digital Assets, Paxos. All 5 got approved for federal trust bank charters, which are basically licenses to hold and manage assets on behalf of customers. The same type of license that governs how JP Morgan or Bank of New York Mellon operates. 5 crypto companies, and they all got it on the same day. That had never happened before. Then in the weeks that followed, Morgan Stanley filed for one. Crypto.com got approved, Stripe stablecoin company got approved, and by March of 2026, 11 companies had filed for or received federal crypto bank licenses in 83 days. So let that sink in for a second. The biggest names in finance and the biggest names in crypto were racing each other to get the same piece of paper. That doesn't happen by accident. That happens because the rules just changed. And the rules did change. To understand how big this is, you need to know what it was like before. For years, US banks were effectively locked out of crypto. The agency that insures your bank deposits, the FDIC, required banks to get permission before even thinking about touching digital assets. The Federal Reserve, which oversees the entire US monetary system, had a policy that treated crypto activities as basically forbidden. The agency that grants bank licenses, the OCC, had tightened everything up. The message from Washington was clear: touch crypto and we'll make your life miserable. So banks did what banks always do when the rules are unclear. They froze, they ran pilots with Ripple, they tested tokenization with Hedera, they explored stablecoin payments on Stellar, and then they quietly shelved all of it. It's like building a highway to a city that won't let anyone drive on it. The road works, the cars are ready, but the city keeps the gates locked. That's been the reality for XRP, HBAR, XDC, and XLM for years. Built for banks and institutions, waiting for banks and institutions to be allowed to use them. And then in 2025, the gates opened. The FDIC dropped the permission requirements. Congress passed the first federal stablecoin law called the Genius Act, which creates clear rules for dollar-backed stablecoins. Who can issue them, how the real dollars backing each stablecoin have to be kept in approved accounts at all times, and how banks can hold and safeguard them. It's similar to when the government created rules for online banking back in the early 2000s. Banks knew the internet was coming, but they didn't go all in until Washington said, here's exactly how you're allowed to do this. The Genius Act is that moment for stablecoins. The Federal Reserve threw out its old anti-crypto policy entirely, and the OCC started handing out those bank licenses that I just told you about. All of this happened within 14 months, and there is a hard deadline baked into the law, July 18, 2026. Every final rule has to be done by then. That's just weeks away, and this isn't slowing down. Just last week on April 7, the FDIC approved a new rule that sets the standards for how banks can hold stablecoins and digital assets for their clients. Comments close June 9th. Final rules are expected before the July deadline. Everything's moving right now and it's accelerating. And if you're the type of person who wants to understand these shifts before they show up in price, then don't forget to subscribe. This channel breaks down the regulatory and institutional moves that most crypto content skip past. It's free and it takes 2 seconds and you'll know what's coming before the crowd does. Now let's talk about what this means for each of these 4 assets, starting with XRP, because XRP has the most direct connection to what just happened. Ripple was one of those 5 companies that got a federal bank license in December. The bank is called Ripple National Trust Bank, and once it's fully up and running, it'll hold and manage the reserves behind Ripple's stablecoin RLUSD under both federal and New York state oversight. An OCC rule that went live on April 1st is what actually lets the banks handle digital assets. So the license is real, the rules are in place, and the bank is moving towards being operational. Now, what this means for XRP specifically is that institutions now have a federally regulated Ripple entity to work with. If a bank or asset manager wants to use Ripple's payment network, where XRP acts as the bridge currency, meaning it's the asset that sits in the middle when you're converting one currency to another, the entity on the other side of that relationship is now a federally licensed trust bank. It's the difference between asking your boss to approve a vendor that nobody's heard of versus one that's regulated by the same agency that oversees JP Morgan. That changes the conversation completely. RLUSD already crossed $1 billion in market cap in under a year, and over 300 financial institutions are partnered through RippleNet. All the pieces were there, but the federal bank license is the piece that was missing. HBAR's angle is a little bit different. Hedera doesn't have its own bank license. What it has is an institutional footprint that most people in crypto don't fully appreciate. Lloyds Banking Group, one of the biggest banks in the UK, took UK government bonds, put them on Hedera's blockchain, and used them as a guarantee backing real financial trades. Wyoming launched its state stablecoin on Hedera. USDC and USDT are both on Hedera as well. The Hedera Governing Council, which is the group of companies that actually help run the network, reads like a Fortune 500 board meeting. They have Google, IBM, Boeing, LG, Deutsche Telekom, and even Repsol. Shinhan Bank and Standard Bank ran pilots using stablecoins to send money across borders on the network. And a spot HBAR ETF, meaning a fund that holds actual HBAR and trades on the stock market, launched on NASDAQ in late 2025. So the regulatory reset matters for HBAR because these institutions were already building on Hedera but couldn't scale those projects into the US banking system. Using blockchain to manage collateral, process stablecoin payments between banks, turn real-world assets into digital tokens. So those are the exact activities that US banks are now cleared to do. The companies on Hedera's council now have the regulatory green light to push what they've been testing into full-scale production. If you're looking to trade any of these assets, I've been using Mexi lately and it's become one of my go-to platforms. They just listed more coins than almost any other exchange, including smaller caps well before the bigger platforms picked them up. XDC, HBAR, XLM, they're all there. Fees are low, withdrawals are fast, and new users can grab up to 10,000 USDT in bonuses. Link is in the description if you want to check it out. XDC is the most focused of these four. It was built for one thing: trade finance. Letters of credit, shipping invoices, supply chain financing, basically all the legal paperwork that proves who's buying what, who's shipping it, and who's guaranteeing the payment. The kind of paperwork that still runs on fax machines in a lot of the world. The global trade finance gap is about $2.5 trillion according to the Asian Development Bank. So to put that into perspective, that's nearly the entire GDP of France. Real goods sitting on real docks because the paperwork can't keep up. XDC is designed to digitize all of that in a format that banks can actually plug into. It speaks the same data language that banks already use for international payments. The regulatory reset helps XDC because digitized trade finance is exactly the kind of activity that US banks can now pursue without worrying about their regulators showing up with questions. XDC's path is slower than the others because trade finance moves slowly. But the door is open. Stellar is the stablecoin play. XLM is the native token of a network that becomes one of the main platforms where dollar-backed stablecoins actually moved and get processed. USDC runs natively on Stellar, PayPal's PYUSD is on Stellar, and Visa integrated Stellar to process stablecoin payments. Franklin Templeton launched the first US-registered money market fund on a public blockchain using Stellar. MoneyGram uses Stellar at over 30,000 locations globally for people to convert cash to crypto and back. The Genius Act is the single most important development for Stellar because the law determines which stablecoins get to operate in the US going forward, how their reserves must work, and who's allowed to issue them. And when the final rules land in July, every stablecoin issuer either complies or exits. Every new entrant, including traditional banks, has to come under this framework. The networks that are already hosting heavy stablecoin activity with low fees and fast processing are going to benefit. Stellar is one of a very small number of networks that fit that description. But let's talk about the honest part about all of this. Regulatory clarity doesn't mean instant price action. None of these agencies named these tokens. Nobody picked winners. What changed is that US banks are now allowed to do the things that these 4 networks were built to support. Whether banks actually choose to do these things on these specific networks is a different question entirely. Ripple has to convert its bank license into real institutional flow. Hedera has to move its council member pilots into full production. XDC has to capture real trade finance volume. And Stellar has to stay the top home for compliant stablecoins. So even though they have the green light, there's still execution that needs to be made ahead. But the macro setup is the strongest that it's been in years. That's just math. Getting a building permit doesn't mean the building exists yet, but nobody starts construction without one. That's where these 4 assets are right now. The permit just got approved. If you want to keep tracking how this plays out as the Genius Act rules finalize and banks start making their moves, subscribe and hit that notification bell. I'll be covering every major development between now and July. The people waiting for the all clear on these assets are going to miss the window because the all clear doesn't come as one big headline. It comes as a quiet, coordinated reset across the agencies that control American banking, stretched over 14 months, with the deadline forcing everything into place. The reset is done, the deadline is weeks away, and 4 tokens are standing exactly where the policy now points. Whether they execute is the next question, and whether the door is open is no longer one of them. See you in the next one.